Hello, my name is Don Knudson. I'm a retired pastor and chaplain, and I have a Christmas story for you today. I have a friend who was a Santa Claus in his life, and he wrote a little book to talk about his life, his journey, his difficulties with alcoholism, and his discovery of Santa to be part of his latter part of life. And so I'm going to read some of the stories that he wrote and then had published before his death. His name was Santa Ray Hornice, and his first chapter is about growing up. My dad came to this country in 1919 when he was 19 years old. I don't know when my mom and dad met or when they were married, but I think it was around 1922 or 23. They moved to Minneapolis and lived a simple life. They raised 4 sons and tried to do the best they could. We were a middle-class family and received only the necessities of life. We had clothes on our back, a roof over our heads, and food for our bellies. I was born in the Swedish hospital January 23rd, 1935, which was probably the coldest month of the year. I don't know why my mom went to the Swedish hospital, but maybe it was because there was no Norwegian hospitals. I thought if you're Norwegian, you should be born in the hospital of one's nationality. But I guess I didn't have a choice in that matter. I was the youngest of 4 boys. My mom wanted a girl, but she never got her wish. My oldest brother Bernie was born in 1925, Donald in 1932, and Roger and I in 1935. I was the other half of twins. My brother was born about a half hour before me, so we were destined to be called the twins for many years ahead. We came into this world right in the middle of the Depression, and those were really tough times. My dad worked as a roofer in the summer, and my mom, she worked at a fish company. Since my dad's work was seasonal, he also worked at the fish company during the winter months. It was hard times for everyone. Then the Second World War came, and we all worked hard for the war effort, which was what it was called in the years that the war was in progress. We all had to do our part. We saved things like tin cans, which we cut the ends from and flattened. We also saved clothes and things to make clothes from. My mom and dad would buy flour by the big bags full, and then they would use the empty sacks for pillowcases. Nothing seemed to be available. My dad used to tell how he could not get tires. He was put on a waiting list for them, and it was almost impossible to get a new car, and we rationed so many of the same things that we could buy with ease today, like butter or sugar, coffee, many other food supplies. Well, Mom and Dad even had to make their own butter. They'd buy cream from the grocer, and with a handheld mixer, they would proceed to mix the cream until it was butter. Do you know how long it takes to make butter from scratch? When I was a little kid, I helped them on several occasions with the butter thing, and it was hard to do. First, my dad would turn that hand mixer for a long time as he could turn it, and then my mom would do it until her hand felt like it would fall off, and then I would try it for a while, and it would go on and on into the night. Well, we would finally reach the point where the cream turned into the butter, finally. But then we would add yellow food coloring to it because it would have been white butter otherwise. And my dad, he never had a new car. He would always drive older cars because he couldn't afford a new one. I remember one time when we were going to Mankato to visit my uncle and aunt. Dad was driving an old Plymouth, and he was having trouble with the radiator. He'd heard from someone that when you have trouble with it, you should put soap in it. So he had some soap with him, and then he poured it into the radiator. Well, we had an endless, dripping, drooling cascade of steaming, sloppy soap suds slipping, sliding, and sizzling down the front of the car. It was a mess. Going to Mankato in those old cars was an all-day affair. But in 1958, my dad finally got his first brand new car. It was a lavender Chrysler. Wow, what a color. I wouldn't take that car to a dogfight. But my dad, he loved it. Like everyone else, I didn't want much out of life, just simple things that life had to offer. One thing I did want from life was to be accepted, and that was going to be a struggle for many years to come. We lived in South Minneapolis by the airport, and it was there that Raj and I started kindergarten. We started school the same year that the Second World War began. School was kind of fun, but all I remember about kindergarten was that we got to take naps on little rugs that we brought from home. My mom must have been real proud of us twins, because she dressed us the same until we were about 13 years old. Boy, was I glad to be 13, if for no other reason than to be able to dress differently. Raj and I started first grade together. Turned out to be the start of some very unhappy school years for me. I remember telling my first grade teacher that I couldn't hear out of one ear. Could I please sit up front? But she yelled back that I was no different than anyone else and I should sit and wear my assigned seat in the back of the room. From that point on, it didn't seem to matter what I did or how I acted. The teachers, for whatever reason, were never very kind to me. I found out at the start of the second grade that I'd have to take the first grade all over again. And this was a particularly painful and humiliating experience for me. And then I turned into an angry little boy. And that anger stayed with me well into my adult years. But more on that later. Well, we lived in an old house on the top of a hill. And in 1941, we moved out to a little area called the Village of Richfield. Well, my dad and uncle built our house, and they also built one for my uncle about 3 doors down from us on the same block. My uncle lived in his house for about a year, and we lived in ours for 11 years. In that area, there were about 7 houses on our block, and one of the houses was right behind ours, where there was no fence to separate them. So my dad planted some poplar trees. There were about 8 or 9 of them all in a row. Their purpose was to separate our yard from the yard to the west of us, and they did. They grew into tall, beautiful, green, and gorgeous specimens, but their life expectancy wasn't very long. But they lived about as long as we stayed in the area. One of our neighbors was called Punjam. He was an old man who owned a lot where our favorite climbing tree was. And that's where we played when we were very young. When I was still a small boy, I was on the corner by the old tree when I first saw them. There were about 5 of them, and they were prowling around and looking bad. I was just passing by the area on my way home from my friend's house, and it was starting to get dark, and I'd only be a block from home, but that short distance turned out to be the longest distance I'd ever traveled in my young life. Because what I saw were those dogs, wild dogs in a pack, and they were coming after me. I was about only 7 or 8 years old at the time, and they were really mean and ugly looking. So they started circling around me, and I became a little uneasy. But the thought of running didn't occur to me, which was a good thing. If they know you're afraid of them, they'll really come after you. So I just kept walking along, and they started nipping at me. And by the time I reached my yard, they were starting to get aggressive, and I was feeling threatened. They hadn't hurt me yet, but it seemed to be just a matter of time that they would. I was just a little kid, and I didn't know what to think about all the commotion, but I did know I was in trouble, and I had to do something and do it fast. Well, my mom was home, which was a good thing, especially for me, and definitely not for the dogs. She must have been watching through the window because she came out of that back door like she was a shot out of a cannon. And she was mad. That woman was madder than those dogs were, and 10 times as mean. You've heard the expression, madder than a hen. Well, she was madder than the whole hen house. She was wielding her broom like a crazed person. She couldn't have done more harm if she'd loaded a shotgun in her hand. She was yelling and screaming and using language like I'd never heard before or ever heard since. My mom beat those poor dogs within an inch of their lives. She was swirling and yelling and beating, pushing, punching, and jabbing like nothing you've ever seen in your life. Those dogs couldn't get away fast enough. They'd finally met their match, and they were big dogs too, not wimpy, happy powder puffs. That day, my mom really came to my rescue. And she did it in other occasions too, but not as dramatically. I've always liked to build and repair things, and that winter I made a sled with a wood frame that was about 4 feet long and about 1.5 feet wide. I put runners on both sides and a sheet of aluminum on the bottom. And then I cut 2 holes in the front, put a rope through the holes so that I have something to pull it with. Now, we lived out in an area where there was graded dirt roads, and they got packed with ice when it snowed. And sometimes the roads didn't get plowed right away, and then we would have a ball. My brother would pull us around on my makeshift sled behind his car, and he'd go real fast, and we would hang on for dear life and would even fly off to the side of the road sometimes. Well, we couldn't steer the sled, so it just went where it wanted to go. First, Raj, he'd ride on it, and then I would ride. We went around the block until my mom found out about it, and then she stopped our games before the games stopped us. Well, Raj and I always had something to do. We'd play marbles for hours. In the wintertime, we'd build forts and throw snowballs at each other and have a good time. We never seemed to run out of imagination. One time, Raj and I were building a tunnel in the backyard under the ground. He was digging towards me and I was digging towards him, but we didn't know it until a shovel came right through the wall of dirt and struck me in the finger. And it cut a pretty good-sized gash. I crawled out of there in a hurry and really got after Raj. All he did was shrug it off. It was no big deal. And I did manage to live after that little mishap, though. Well, Raj and I fought like cats and dogs almost all the time, but we had some good times, too. In the summer, when it rained real hard, we would float on just about anything that floated along the road. Little streams and rivers would form in front of our house, and the road dips down, going down south, so we could have a lot of fun in the middle of a thunder shower. I remember one beautiful summer day when my dad took Mom, Raj, and me out to Lake Nokomis. It was in the morning, and he dropped us off so we could enjoy the day. Mom had a picnic lunch, all packed and everything. She brought swimming suits for us. Raj could swim, but I couldn't. We found an inner tube, and Raj proceeded to show me how to float in it. Well, I didn't know that I was supposed to hold on to the tube with my arms. I was just sitting in that thing, and all of a sudden I fell through the hole. And there I was, just a little kid, floating to the bottom of Lake Nokomis. Moments later, a hand reached down into the water and grabbed me by the hair and pulled me out. That hand belonged to my mom. She'd been sitting on the bank beside the lake, and she fished me right out of the water. I remember that so vividly. Let me tell you, I thought I was a goner, but my mom came to my rescue again. Now, we lived in an old house on the southeast corner of the block. I remember that the backyard was steep. In the winter, it would get real muddy and slippery. And that was the hill I was trying to get on Halloween night a long, long time ago. But I remember what it was just like it was yesterday. I was just a little kid, around 5 or 6 years old. I was out doing the trick-or-treat thing for the first time. And it was a cold and rainy night, and it was very dark. I was with my brother Raj and some other kids, and we were making the rounds to different houses. I remember that I was so cold and just wanted to go back home where it was nice and warm. We were carrying shopping bags, but they were not at all like the ones the kids carry now. They only carry plastic now, and it never rips or tears when it gets wet. Well, the one I was carrying was ready to come apart, but I didn't know it. I do know that I was crying because I was so wet and cold, but not as wet and cold as I was going to be in a short while later. Well, I started to climb that hill to our backyard, and I slipped and I fell and my bag broke, spilling all kinds of candy and pennies into the mud. I was cold, wet, and muddy, and all the stuff I'd worked half the night to get was lying in the mud. I tried to pick it up, but I just kept slipping in the mud and getting muddier and wetter and colder. And the rest of the kids, including my brother Raj, just ran right past me and stepping on all of my treasures and mashing them deep into the mud. But I finally got to the house with my mom's help, and I was really angry and sad. Everything I'd worked for that night was out on that muddy hill. And that's what I remember about my first Halloween. Sometimes life can be a royal pain when one is a little child. Well, several times when Raj and I were little, our mom and dad would take us from South Minneapolis downtown to the heart of the city, where all the big, tall buildings stood. And that is where all the Christmas lights and decorations were. And we were always so excited seeing the wonders of the holiday season. The big buildings were dressed in their colorful finery, and splashes of color were everywhere. We especially liked the store windows and how they came alive with color. We could see the toy trains go through little towns, and they made it look so real with dancing bears and people skating and all the wondrous joys that make a child's eyes light up. It was such a good time for us. I think my mom and dad enjoyed it too, but surely not as much as we did. I remember one night in particular, as we were looking at all those wonderful, colorful creations, it was very cold that night, and maybe my dad was telling us that too, so he would say, "Brrr, it's cold out here tonight. I think maybe we should duck into this place so we can keep warm," he said. And so we went into a nice warm store, and who do you suppose was right inside the door with a line of kids all around him? You guessed it, Santa Claus. My dad had a plan, and it worked. I'd never seen Santa in person, so it was a treat. We not only got to see old Mr. Whiskers, but we got a nice big candy cane out of the deal as well. And boy, was that ever neat. I remember two other Christmases that stood out in my mind. One was when I was 8 and a couple of weeks before the holidays, I was sliding down the hill we had in our neighborhood, and I was riding on my old rickety sled getting nowhere. I just couldn't get it to go. It was broken. As a little kid, I didn't know how to fix it. So I just put it in the basement and forgot about it. And I thought maybe our big wide coal shovel would suffice. And that did work for a while. But it wasn't the same as having a sled. Boy, I sure wanted a new sled for Christmas. Or anything that I could use on the hill with the other kids that would go really fast. And I decided I wasn't going to get one because it was hard times. My mom and dad, they had more important things to get than a sled. So I tried to forget about it, and I did other things. But I didn't do much sliding. At Christmas time, our custom was like this. My mom and dad would come home from work, and we, mom and dad, Bernie, Don, Raj, and I, we would all have supper together. And we always had fish on Christmas Eve. My dad, he loved fish. I can truly say that I hate fish now that I'm an adult. Well, after supper, the dishes had to be washed after the meal, and that always seemed to take forever. But we finally got to unwrap the presents, which was so much fun. And when we were all done, I sure was happy with everything that I'd gotten, and the living room was a mess, and Mom started cleaning up. And then my dad told me that there was something standing outside by the front door, and he asked me if I would go get it. So I went out, and I got it, and brought it in. My dad let me unwrap it, and after all the wrappings were off, there was the shiniest, prettiest, red and yellow rocket sled that anyone ever set eyes on. My mom and dad were thrilled that I was happy little kid again. So I passed everyone on the hill that year. That's what Christmas is all about, being good to little kids. There are special people out there like parents who are good to little kids. And there's another Christmas that stands out with joy in my mind's eye, and it's the year that Raj and I got something we were somewhat unprepared for. I'm not sure that I even asked for the present, but I sure got one, and so did Raj. But mine was just a little unusual. You see, we both got skis for Christmas. What was unusual was that our folks tried to get us both a pair of them, but all they could get was one pair to start with. So they asked who wanted them. Well, I said I did, so Raj would have to wait for his pair. They were unusual because they were stained red, but as I figured out later, they were never varnished. Everywhere I went, the whole neighborhood knew where I was and who I went to see, because the skis, they left red tracks every place that I was at. And finally, my dad, seeing that, got some varnish and took care of the situation real fast. I do remember that so vividly. And Raj finally got his skis, but they were normal, and you could say mine were abnormal. Those are the two Christmases that I remember most. The next story Santa Ray told is a story about being lost in the city. I was over at my brother Raj's house a while ago, and he reminded me of something that for the life of me, I don't know why it could have slipped my memory. It was something that was a big deal when I was 6 years old. In fact, some of my relatives are still talking about it. When I was younger, I was continually reminded of it by my aunts and uncles. And it all started like this. Raj and I went to visit my cousin Lloyd, who lived in South Minneapolis, over by the airport, which was called Wold Chamberlain Field at that time. The year was 1941, and we arrived there in the morning, as I recall, because we were going to spend the entire day out at Como Zoo, which was way over in St. Paul. My aunt took 4 of us little kids, Cousin Lloyd, his neighbor Don Jones, Raj, and me. She would take us all on the streetcar, which had to be in itself quite an undertaking. She didn't drive a car because my uncle didn't own one. So not many women drove cars in those days. It was not at all like it is now. My auntie was such a nice lady, and she just loved little kids, so she would have as much fun as we would. We planned spending all day at the zoo, riding the rides, eating, trying out lots of treats, visiting all the animals. Well, as it turned out, it was a day that I would never forget, and surely my aunt never would either, and she lived into her 90s. The day started out to be a beautiful, sunny summer day without a cloud in the sky. It was perfect time for a picnic, and it was going to be a fun day for all of us. And as the day wore on, we started to get tired from all of the excitement, and it was getting late in the afternoon. My auntie was getting ready to leave, and she started rounding up all the kids. She asked Raj where I was, and he said that he'd seen me over by where the monkey cages were. Yeah, well, I'd been looking at the monkeys, and my auntie was right beside me, but I turned around, and she was gone. Where did everyone go? There's lots of people everywhere, but nobody that I knew. I was looking all over. I couldn't find anyone that looked familiar. I didn't just sit down and cry or scream like crazy or carry on. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I'd have to do something. And I seemed to have looked everywhere for them, and I thought maybe if I started walking, they would surely see me. So I started doing just that. Well, unfortunately, instead of walking around the park, I walked out of it completely. How I kept my wits about me, I truly don't know. There was definitely something out there looking out for me. I was just a little boy, and I decided there was no need to get all shook up about the situation. The fact of the matter was, I was lost, and if I just kept calm, I'd be okay. But at 6 years of age, how would I even really know what that meant? Maybe it was kind of a divine intervention, because someone was looking out for me through that whole crazy situation. There was something working in my favor for sure. 6 years old and lost in that big city, and would soon be getting dark. I had no clue as to where to go or how to gather. I had no idea what direction I should be walking. I was lost in a part of town that I knew nothing about. Where I actually lived was about 20 miles from where I was lost. And it was starting to get dark. I really didn't know what to do, so I just kept walking, not having the slightest idea as to where I was going, but I was still cool. It was not only getting dark, but it was starting to rain. It was a nice warm rain though, and I loved rain, so it was okay with me. I walked, and for some unforeseen reason, I seemed to be going in the right direction. As I think back, God was keeping an eye on me for sure in that early part of my life. Now, isn't that a wonderful thought? Well, I can't remember if there's anyone on the streets or not, but I do remember that the street lights were on, but once in a while the lightning would shoot across the sky to brighten up the night and make it almost like day. The thunder was rolling and rumbling, but I just kept on walking. It sure seemed as though I walked for an awful long time, and I was starting to get tired. I tried to figure out what I should do. The thought occurred to me that maybe I should see if I could find someone who could help me get back home somehow. Why not see if I could find a nice, warm, dry place to take a little nap? Wow, what a great idea. But where could that be? And how was I going to find that place? And as I walked down the dark, wet streets, I decided I had to find a particular kind of house. It couldn't be just any house. It had to have the right feeling about it. The people who lived in it had to just love little children or maybe have some of their own. It had to have that warm, cozy look about it. So I walked and I looked. Finally, I spotted a really good-looking old stucco house with a screened front porch. I decided, that's it. I walked up to it and wondered what I should do if the door wasn't open. Well, then I'd just have to find another perfect house. I tried turning the handle, and it was open. I went inside very quietly and softly. I wasn't cold, but I was wet and very tired, and I had no idea at all as to what the time was. I didn't know how long I'd been walking. It must have been real late because it sure was dark. Every once in a while, the lightning would throw some light into the room so I could see where I was going, and then I didn't fall over something. But the only thing on the porch was a bed, and over in the corner was something with a tarp thrown over it. I walked up to the big oak door and rang the bell and waited, but nothing happened. I rang the bell again, but still there was nothing. No one was home. And I wondered what was under that tarp, so I went over, checked it out. Lo and behold, there was a wonderful old overstuffed chair under there, beckoning me to just curl up like an old tomcat, take a nap that I had been thinking about for quite some time. I could sleep and wait for the people to come home, and maybe my clothes would be dry as I slept. So I crawled up into that big overstuffed chair. Boy, it was nice and warm, cozy, and I fell asleep right away. I don't know how long I slept, but I heard people when they arrived home. I waited for a short while so that they could get settled before I knocked on their door again. Then, when the time was right, I rang the bell. Finally, a lady came to the door and opened it, and she had a look of surprise on her face. I'm sure I was a shock for her to open the door at that time of night and find a little boy standing there. I said very politely, "I'm lost. Could you find my auntie for me?" Well, she immediately called her husband into the front room, and he picked up the telephone and he called someone right away. I guess I must have still been a little wet and damp from the rain, because they started giving me lots of warm milk and wrapped blankets around me. Then, in a short while, the police came to talk to the people and to me. The police told me that they would take me home, and I thanked the people for letting me sleep in their chair. And then we left. When I got back to my auntie's house, everyone there, my mom, dad, and auntie and uncle, they were crying, and they kept hugging me. Every time either one of them looked in my direction, they'd hug me. Everything had turned out wonderfully. I can't begin to imagine what went on in my auntie's mind during that time I was gone. I'm sure she felt terribly responsible. She must have gone through hell. I put them all through hell. After it was all over, I found out that I had walked over 11 miles in the right direction, in the middle of a rainstorm, in the darkest and latest part of the night. There definitely was some power of the Spirit that kept me from numerous kinds of tribulations that could have befallen a little boy of 6. My journey actually made the local newspaper under the caption, "Lost Boy Wanders Through Rainstorm." Now, I don't know what happened to those people in the house where I slept that night. I tried to get in touch with them on a couple of occasions, and I did talk to the lady over the telephone once. Well, that was my ordeal, which happened almost 80 years ago, but that memory lives on in this story as it has been repeated by my relatives most every time we get together. This next story is called Sadness and Sobriety. I enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school. After I'd completed the basic training, I was assigned to another base. And I learned that my mom was deathly ill, that I had to go home on a 30-day emergency leave to be by her side. And while I was on leave, and after an extension of those 30 days into 60, I thought that she was getting better. And that night we got the call from the hospital, and my beautiful, caring, loving mom had died in her sleep. We were all in a state of shock. My dad, he was like a lost soul. And my brothers, well, I guess I don't know what they were going through because they would hardly ever talk. But I sure know about me. I had to face the hard fact that my mom was gone from us, never to be seen again. After all the relatives and many good friends had come to pay their last respects, and the dust had settled, we all went back to what we might call a reasonable, normal life without her. Well, after 60 full days, I had to get back to the Air Force Base in Illinois. I still felt rotten about the whole situation, which I left back in Minnesota. And I took much of that with me, back into my barracks, back into my head and my heart. I couldn't show or express any emotions at all. I had to keep the stiff upper lip and my nose to the grindstone. Business as usual. No sentiments, no feelings, no sorrow, no sadness, no nothing. I had to go on as if nothing had happened for those 60 days that I was gone. And I had to act as if nothing had changed in my life. But I was hurting so bad inside that I thought I'd explode. I didn't have any way to deal with these many feelings, and I was stunned for a long time. It was like I was walking in a dense fog and not knowing what direction I was walking. So now I ask, why wasn't there someone on that base that could help me get through this very bad time of life? Where were the chaplains on the base to help guys like me that had so much on their mind that was whirling around in all directions? Why was I alone again, just like I was in the school system to fend for myself? So much nonsense to deal with again by myself. Is there any end to all of this? Well, I'm sure it showed in the way I appeared. I more than likely had an expressionless look and the way I perceived things. It was a lot like that all through the grades in school. I had to just stuff it, and stuff it I did. I did it very well, in fact. I never did deal with my mom's death, but I seemed to have a whole barrel of trouble. It kind of follows me wherever I went. I'm sure it all is in direct result of the many things I had to just shrug off for so long. After serving 3.5 years, I was honorably discharged, and I was released from the active duty of the U.S. Air Force, September of 1957, at the young age of 23 years. Now, after I was out of the service for a while, I tried to assassinate my liver by consuming as much alcohol as I could possibly do during a period of about 12 years. In 1966, I met a lady named June. During that time, we planned a wedding, and it was to be held at her friend's house in Edina. She had 2 little boys named Jim and Todd, who were 8 and 9 years old. I would take them fishing like my dad used to take me, and we'd also play ball. We had fun, like dads do with their little ones. They sure were nice little kids, and I loved both them and their mom. All the invitations were sent out. The evening arrived, and we were to tie the knot, and I went over to pick her up, and then she turned me down. I asked her why. Well, she wouldn't give a reason. Oh man, I was devastated. I couldn't understand what went wrong, and to this day I don't know what happened. But luckily, it was still early in the day, so I called my brother Raj, and I asked him to call everyone on the guest list and tell them it's off. The wedding is off. No reason. Just tell him that. Well, there was one person not on the list, and I didn't know his phone number, so I didn't get a chance to call him. And as the day grew on, I was starting to drink my favorite beverage, beer, and I ran out. So I went up to the liquor store, and I was in there for about 10 minutes, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, and it was the friend that I didn't have the phone number for. Now, I don't remember his name, but I did remember that he did like to take pictures, and that he was a school teacher. And he asked me, why aren't you at the church about getting hitched? And then I told him it was off. I didn't have a reason, because she never gave me one. Now, as I remember, I went back to my apartment to cry in my beer. Actually, I had all the booze in the trunk of my car, and I never did find out what happened. And this incident remains one of the saddest times of my life. And of course, the drinking continued. And so now Ray has some more drinking stories. Later that winter, on one particular nice sunny day, I went out skiing with my brother Raj and cousin Lloyd. We were out on the slopes, and I was going to show them how to stop. I was a novice skier. I didn't know anything about skiing, and if one can't ski very well, learning how to stop would definitely be a step up. So I did learn how to negotiate a way of stopping. I learned that little maneuver, and I got to be quite good at it. As a matter of fact, I could stop better than I could ever ski, but I never did learn how to actually ski very well. And of course, when I was learning how to ski, I was also learning how to drink. I think my talent in drinking surpassed my thoughts that I might have had anything else that I could have or would have done. The first time that I did my little stopping trick, I made sure that the edges of my skis were real sharp. I got out on the slopes. I watched some people skiing, and they were stopping real good, so I watched them for a long time. And after seeing them do that, I figured if they could do it, so could I. I was by myself. I wasn't worried about crashing into anything. I just guess I've spent a long time practicing because I was impressing everyone on the hill with my unbelievable intellectual knowledge and capability of having the graceful and self-controlling ability to stop on a dime. Well, after having done that, I figured I could show those birds that when it comes to shooting the head wall, I was first class. I'd show them that they weren't hanging around some pipsqueak type of skier. I'd show them a thing or two, and boy, did I show them a thing or two. I ended up showing them how I could kill myself with hardly any effort at all. The rental place would not sharpen the skis as sharp as I would have if I'd have been able to do it myself. They had to be sharp so that you could cut a piece of paper with ease to be able to stop really good. So when I and Raj and cousin Lloyd were together, I forgot to check on that issue, and instead of being sharp as a razor, those blades were dull as a marble. And there I was, out on the slopes, looking down that long hill. It almost seemed like a mountain from where I was standing, and I saw a little dip like a mini ski jump, about 2/3 of the way down, and that's where I would show the guys my magnificently orchestrated maneuver, and they would see how I could gracefully land like a soft, masterful bird. I worked out a plan. I would kick off and rip down that hill like they'd never seen anyone do before, and when I reached that mini ski jump, I would put on the brakes like one never knew was possible, and then and only then would I stop on that dime. Well, at the top of the hill, I thought, oh my God, this is a hell of a big hill. If I make a mistake, I'm dead before I'm at the bottom of the hill. Man, do I really want to do this? Do I want to sacrifice life and limb for this stupid stunt? This isn't the war zone. There's no one here telling me I have to do it. It's my own idiotic, harebrained idea. By then I was so shaky, I couldn't hold on to the sticks, let alone try to use them for something like negotiating myself down the hill with as much dignity as I could muster. So I thought, I'll show them that I can fall down that hill like the best of them, and that's exactly what I'll be doing because I'm not a skier. I'm only a stopper. I told Raj and Lloyd that I was going to pull off this feat, so it's now or never. I guess this is a good time as any to meet my maker. Oh, I was moving faster than my brain, and I were trying to slow down so that it could catch up with me. And I was right at that little dip, which wasn't so little anymore, and over I went. Because of the dullness of my skis and also my brain, I was having a rather difficult time maneuvering that hill gracefully. I'm sure by this time you've guessed what happened on that fateful day. Have you ever seen anything in slow motion? Someone should have had a camera. It'd have been a classic. There I was in perfect form for stopping, but I wasn't stopping. When I came to that little dip and I put on brakes to stop, the mound just kept moving and I was flying through the air like a bird on the wing. And all the way down the hill, I was thinking that, well, I tried, but I died. Well, I finally did stop at the bottom of the monster hill from hell. I hit ground about as hard as if I'd dropped from an airplane. What a spectacle to behold. I might have floated through the air with the greater of ease, but that sure wasn't the case at all when I landed. I wasn't hurt. I didn't break anything. I walked away unscathed, but my ski clothes looked like they'd been shredded. After that ordeal on the monster mountain of Michigan, I closed the chapter on my skiing career forever. Well, I was on a date with my friend Sherry, and we were drinking, as it was right after I got my brand new Thunderbird, my little 1966 baby blue T-Bird, a nice little set of wheels. About the only thing I remember was that my consumption was almost a full quart of brandy. I left a portion of it on the table where I was sitting, and when I left the bar, I was so drunk, walking was very difficult to say the least. But I walked right up to my little T-Bird and got in. Now, if you've ever known any alcoholics, you would know that there's such a thing as blackouts. That's when your mind just shuts down and it's really spooky. You're in control of your body, but you won't remember a thing. I was in full control of my body, as it were, and I could function to a point. But now you have to remember that I was having a hard time walking because I was so drunk. Anyway, I laid behind the steering wheel and I started my little buggy up, and that was the last thing I remember. The next day I woke up and boy was I hungover. That brandy is some deadly stuff. It's like drinking concentrated wine. I was so sick, I really hoped that someone would just come along and shoot me, but not make a lot of noise while they were doing it. Now that's one thing us drunks do after we've been out all night drinking. It is to get up the next day and look to see if our wheels are okay. Well, anyway, I looked out the window down into the parking lot to find my little T-Bird. I looked where it was usually parked, and it wasn't there. So I looked in some other places, and the little blue guy wasn't there either. Well, I got dressed and decided to go down to see where I'd put the little wagon, but there was still no little blue car, and I started to get nervous. I went back into the apartment and I tried to think of where it could be. And I looked at the clothes that I'd wore the night before. They weren't all torn up, so I decided I hadn't been in any accident. And if a cop had pulled me over, I had to be in a very different kind of hotel, so where the heck are my wheels? Since Sherry had been with me the night before, I thought she might know, so I called her. Well, she told me that she now has my little sweet blue rascal. She said I was too drunk to drive, and so she drove it home. She always liked my little blue bird, so I made one for her out of a little wood frame and gave it to her to thank her for making sure that I got home safely that night. Well, during this time, my attitude was really getting bad because of my drinking and all the other stuff that I did. Such a good job of stuffing, and it all started cropping up, and it would come back like ghosts haunting me. There's all that negative stuff that's now showing its ugly little self. You see, after I was out of the service for a while, my oldest brother Bernie offered me a job, but unfortunately, after working in his domain for 9 months and a lot of bitterness on both sides, he fired me. Now, I wasn't real happy about it, and I didn't understand why he'd do that to his own brother. I was really unhappy, and I didn't know why. Maybe I was going through some ordeal or depression, but I didn't have a clue. It sure showed up in my bad side and my not too pleasant attitude, and that's why I was fired, but I didn't know that. Well, eventually that would change too, but it would take a while, like several years, actually. It was that negative school stuff again I thought about that I had to take care of. I just wasn't a very happy person. I wasn't happy while I was in the service either. And there I was on my own working many different jobs. They didn't pay very well. I was really about starving. I was living on one meal a day, and That consisted of a vitamin pill, a quart of milk, and a box of chocolate-covered donuts. That's all I had every day. But after 3 years of tossing about from one job to another that didn't pay so hot, eventually I got a call from my brother's partner, his name is Mark, to come and work for them again. And this time, I did work for them for 8 years. And during that time, my alcoholism continued to get out of hand. My drinking became an obsession. Depression and loneliness kind of took over, and I was caught right in the middle of it. Overuse of alcohol caused depression, and of course, no one would hang around with me because I was drinking. I was alone most of the time. Loneliness would take me back to the times when I had so much fun before the alcoholism took over that it was very difficult to get through. And it was during that time then I met Michael. At that point, I didn't have very many friends because of the way I'd acted towards so many people that I'd known. I'd say really off-colored things. I'd get into a whole lot of trouble, especially with women. Well, anyway, Michael was truly, I thought, a good friend. He and I lived in the same apartment building, so we hung around a lot. And if I wanted to go someplace to drink, I'd just go down the hall and ask if he wanted to go out and have a pop. We often had the occasion to close quite a few bars in our day. He was self-employed in some kind of sales and was very good at it. I, on the other hand, still worked for my brother, so I couldn't go to all the places he went and do all of the things that he did. Well, one of the many things that he could do was fly an airplane. One Saturday afternoon, after we both had been drinking most of the morning, he asked me if I would go with him on a short flight to look at some real estate that he was going to sell. So off we went to the airport. The airplane was warming up. It was sitting there. All we had to do was jump on board, and up and away in that little airplane we went. Here we are, both drunk as skunks, flying around looking for some real estate just like we knew what we were doing. Michael checked the gas gauge and he said that, well, we need some petrol. So he landed and both of us were not in the best shape to be flying, as you know. A man came out and proceeded to attempt to fill the tank, spilling gas in the process while he was smoking a cigarette. So if Michael doesn't kill us after tipping another quart, slurring his words and staggering all over, for sure, this guy pumping gas with his lit cigarette surely will. Well, what can you do? I'm just a drunk like Michael. Maybe that pump master is in the same shape as the both of us. Who gives a rat's neck anyway? Michael and I tip another quart and get out of this hole in the wall, and up and away we go in our beautiful balloon flying machine, drunker than 2 billy goats. Normally that alone would be sobering enough if we were sober, because no one in their right mind would be doing what we're doing. And the things I did while drunk. I do wonder how I ever survived it all. God surely was watching out for us. Well, Michael and I had to go take a test for our motorcycle licenses. Oh man, how sick and hungover were we, and how terrible we felt, but we could hardly navigate ourselves along trying to steer a reasonable course on a vehicle with 2 wheels going very slowly. We kept tipping over, falling down, running into things. I had a very difficult time keeping the handlebars from jumping all over. We did, however, pass the test, only because I think the instructor felt sorry for us. He could see that we knew what we were doing. We could do everything that was set before us except actually doing it. He could see we tried so hard to accomplish all the tasks, but we were shaking so bad. Yeah, he eventually passed us. With tests like that behind us, and because we were so sick, we just wanted to go home to some place and just die. Of course, we went back to the same place that we'd been the night before and started drinking all over again. This cycle continued, but then the fun times started to change. Michael now would get nasty, mean, rude, and obnoxious. And later in my drinking years, I got that way too. The last straw for me happened one particular night when I was drinking very heavily. I got into an argument with this lady who lived in the apartment down the hall from me, and I put a fist right through her door. Well, the next day I went over to apologize to her, and she was afraid of me. I had to call up the owner of the building and fess up. I told him what I'd done. I thought he might have me thrown out. But he didn't. Well, that's when I finally quit drinking, and I got into the AA program on November 15th. 1969. I called my friend Michael, who at the time had already been in an AA for about 3 months. He'd taken me to one of his meetings, but I didn't get much out of it because I wasn't ready. I was getting to the point of desperation, and now I needed help bad. I thought I was slowly losing what little I had in my mind that was left. I experienced the DTs on 2 separate occasions. I was having a really hard time of it. I needed help. And I made that call to Michael. I told him that I was ready finally to return to AA. And would he please help me? And now he didn't live in the same apartment anymore because he'd gotten married and he was living elsewhere. But he did in fact come over to visit me, and he brought a lot of the AA books and paraphernalia with him. And among the many books and pamphlets in the mix, there was this hard-covered big blue bound book called The Big Book. He told me to meet him at a church in Edina. Well, I wasn't real hot on the idea of meeting him at a church, but I showed up at the given place at the specific time. Now, Michael never did show up, but I did attend that group for about 3 weeks. I didn't really get anything out of it, though. My heart wasn't in it at all. But I was told that there was a new group starting at another location, so I went to that meeting the next week, and that turned out to be a new beginning for me. It was wonderful. Just what the doctor ordered. I got to meet new friends, and they always had something going on, and I loved it. The new group was held in an old warehouse. Well, when this new group first started, we had to bring our own coffee, our own chair, ashtrays, the card table, if we had one. And the first time I walked through that door, I felt accepted and connected. I could relate to those people because I was one of them. There was a name for what I'd had, which was that I was an alcoholic. The acceptance and knowing made me feel great. The only option that I had at the beginning before AA was continuing on a path that meant death and insanity. Surely there had to be a better way than the way I was going. And I did keep going to meetings, and at some point we decided that the warehouse needed to be spruced up a bit. Well, each one of us did a little something to help put it all together. One of the guys worked at a golf club that was being remodeled, and so he got some furniture and couches and some lamps. Another one was a carpet layer, and he found a whole lot of carpet. He put it all down. There were a couple of other guys who donated a pool table and ping pong table, and then I painted the whole place, wall, ceiling, and trim, because I was the painter. It really turned out pretty nice for an old dirty warehouse that it once had been. Unfortunately for my friend Michael, things didn't turn out so well. We were in separate AA groups, but still saw each other on occasion. And we made a pact that each of us was going to grow a beard, and if either one of us started drinking again, the beard had to go. Well, I ran into Michael about a year later, and I saw that he was clean shaven. I asked him what happened. He said he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't stay sober. Well, I hung out with him a couple of times more, but he just wasn't the same Michael that I used to know. About 3 years later went by. I saw Michael's lady friend, and I asked her how he was doing. She asked me if I'd been out of town or something. I curiously asked her why she would ask, and she told me Michael had died 3 weeks earlier, and she wanted to know why I wasn't at the funeral. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I asked her what he died from. She said, well, he never stopped drinking after he started again. He was 38 years old. Wow. It's my responsibility now to help all the Michaels out there. With God's help, the AA program, you don't never ever have to carry that burden alone by yourself, and you'll never be alone. As the book Alcoholics Anonymous states, you will eventually know a new freedom and a new happiness. You'll not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. You will comprehend the word serenity, and you will know peace. No matter how far down the scale you've gone, you will see how your experience can benefit others. And the serenity prayer is a part of my life. Santa Ray put the serenity prayer in his book. God give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Santa Ray, in his book now, focuses on finding Santa Claus. The answer was something I'd never believed if I hadn't been the recipient. I was in awe, and it was fabulous. I got warm and tingly when I thought of it. It was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me. This perplexing puzzle has definitely complicated my life for way over 60 years. I'd been a mess in my life, and it all started in school at the age of 6. But now I'd gotten rid of all that anger. I'd given up my resentment too. John V., a guy on my brother's painting crew, when I was still drinking and all hung over, he'd say, "Ray, your eyes look like they've been sewn together with red thread." Well, I'm an old Scandinavian man, not a little boy anymore. My hair's no longer blonde. It hadn't been for a long time. Now it's white as the driven snow, but my eyes are still blue. Long before my drinking days, I had a terrible dislike for Christmas, for depression was what happened to me every year. Every year around mid-October, it'd start to go downhill, and I'd fall into depression. By the time November was here, I was in really bad shape. And when the calendar swung into December, my depression was in full swing, and it was down, down as far as I could go. My chin dragging on the floor. I was down for the count, and I didn't want to be disturbed for anything. For when I was drinking, I was always hungover. While drunk, I hoped that someone would declare Christmas out of season. Somehow Christmas would not be permitted anymore, and it would be erased from the calendar altogether. I remember many a Christmas morning when I drove past churches. I'd see people with their families having such a merry time, their little children enjoying the holiday season. And it reminded me of a Norman Rockwell painting. Well, I was on my way home from another bout of what I call king alcohol. I was sick again, feeling sorry for myself, lonely. In fact, I was always alone. Maybe that's where this Christmas loneliness comes from. I had many days of feeling down, and it went with depression. All that negativeness left a big hole in my heart and life, and I didn't know what I was trying to drown until I first started to write this book. I was still going through that same depression around holidays after I sobered up. I had the same depression for 20 plus years, suffering from the ramifications of that depression, and it really got old. Everyone I was associated with that I'd gone through, they must have wondered about me because I was always acting unusual, because depression does that. To have been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 23 years, I thought that this down feeling every Christmas nonsense that I experienced would have to come to a halt. I'd gone on too long. I decided I had to do something. And so I prayed for change and healing. 23 years ago, this praying had led me to the AA program, and now it's time for asking God's help again. I said, in essence, God, could you help me here? I've had this negative, dark cloud hanging over me for so long. Year after year, it comes to me in the form of depression. I've been down as a result of it. It's taken too much energy. It's made me feel hard to get along with. When it comes, many of the people who care about me leave. They go to places where it's better for them. Could you please take it from me and replace it with some positive, loving, good stuff? And I humbled myself, knelt down by the couch, and I said, God, you helped me find sobriety 23 years ago. I'm forever grateful for that. But please take away from me this anger and depression that's possessed me for so long. Can you replace it with a way to give love and kindness, hope to something and someone that's struggling with their own anguish, depression, and pain? Please. Please grant me that special gift. I pray this in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Well, the answer was so unbelievable. I found something that was quite wonderful. It was an answer to a question that had haunted me for years. The day was appropriately a Sunday. I just returned home from church. I thought, well, today's the perfect time to search for the answer. I knew it was somewhere, but where? So I looked by the big hutch on the wall, and by the wall there's books and magazines, and I checked in the cabinets and I looked in the cupboards. Where was it? How was I to find it? I walked across the room to my couch that was littered with magazines and papers. Where is this? I sank down in the soft cushions, and then a big heavy book bumped my head. What was it? It was the J.C. Penney catalog. Huh, is this what I've been looking for? I wasn't sure, but I picked it up, this heavy, thick-bound book. Some of you might still remember those books. And I closed my eyes, I held up this huge volume over my head, and I let the pages buzz by my thumb, and I decided whatever page that it stops on, there the answer would be found. Well, when I looked at the page that I inadvertently stopped on, there right in front of me was the answer. There was pictures of Santa Claus with 2 pages filled with various Santa suits. I shouted to myself, yes, I can do this. This is it. What a wonderful gift from God. Well, I've heard that God works in mysterious ways, but this seemed too absolutely unbelievable. Of the hundreds, if not thousands of pages in that big catalog, how could it have possibly landed on that particular page? So I called J.C. Penney's and I ordered a brand new Santa suit. The package arrived 2 weeks later, and everything that I needed was right there in that box. What a wonderful gift. I humbly accept and I respect and cherish it, I said to God. Well, playing the part of Santa is its own reward, as many of us who have donned this costume know. And it's the most gratifying role that I could have ever played. In it, I can be all things to all people and be the bearer of many joys that Christmas has to offer. And I'm blessed and honored to be part of something so wondrous. Well, I can say in all honesty that playing the part of Santa Claus is the best thing that ever happened to me. Man, am I so happy about that. There's hardly a day that goes by that I'm not reminded of that little round guy in that red suit. So if it isn't some kind of little kid who thinks that I'm the big guy, it is a big person who sees the resemblance and say, hey, you look like you would make a good Santa. Well, I love that. I feel so good when they say that to me. Sometimes it's really hard to believe it actually happened like it did. And that's why I tell this story to about everyone that I meet or with whom I have a conversation. There's no denying what the power of prayer can do. Well, as the Santa Claus story goes on, Santa Ray received a letter from a family that I think describes his feeling, the best letter he'd ever received. And this one was dated December 4th, 1998, and it says, Dear Santa, I'm writing to thank you as big as my heart will let me. On Wednesday evening, my husband and son were walking through Knollwood when my son Cody spotted you and you were all alone. Cody came running and you scooped him up with no hesitation. Cody shared a moment with you that he's been waiting for all year. You see, Cody is so personable, and last year Santa paid him no attention. It was take a picture and move on. This year, I wanted to check the Santas out to be sure that Cody got his moment. Well, I didn't have to do that because Cody got his moment with you, and he's been telling everyone about it. Again, thank you for giving Cody something special this year. This next section, Santa Ray called Albertville Jack. It all started when my friend Ray, who worked at a counseling clinic, asked me if I would play Santa at their Christmas party for clients who used their service. And while I was there, one of the ladies in the office asked me if I could also play Santa for her family. I called her the next day and I explained that since I was getting so close to Christmas Day that the only day that I had available was Christmas Day. She didn't want me to have to come on Christmas Day, but I assured her I don't really have anything else going on anyway. I could certainly be there. Well, she said that she'd let me know the time later and that her family lived in Albertville. I wasn't even sure where Albertville was. So I asked for directions and also who would I be playing Santa for, and she told me it was for her son. This little boy had suffered a serious head injury 3 years earlier. And when she told me about that little 10-year-old boy, I really agonized over it because I knew that I would surely go and see and talk to him and that I could do so so easily. But the reason for concern is because during the Christmas season, before and a little after, I would be going through some real tough depression. And that's why I make such a good Santa, because I know how it feels to be hurt and how debilitating that can be. Well, I'd told Peggy that I would be at their house sometime before noon on Christmas Day, and I left my place in Burnsville at 9:30 just to give myself plenty of time. This was for two reasons. I hate to be late, and I hate getting lost even more. Well, once I got off the main road on the way to Albertville, I turned right instead of left. And after driving around for a while, I stopped, talked to a farmer who was just getting into his truck, and he said I was going in the wrong direction. And I told him, my friend Rudolph, with his red nose, is usually a pretty good guide, but apparently not in this case. He didn't appear to be amused. Well, I returned to my vehicle, and I turned around, and at least now I was going in the right direction. Well, once I got back into town, I stopped at a gas station for more detailed directions. And unfortunately, they were not exactly accurate either. Finally, after driving for what seemed like eternity, I did get to the right highway, and I turned where I thought I was supposed to, but unfortunately, this was another wrong turn, and I was lost again. After talking to neighbors 2 blocks away, I finally found the right house, and I pulled into the driveway at 11:50 a.m. I knew that Jack was waiting for a particular toy since last year, so I had to try to give him some kind of an explanation as to why it had taken so long for me to find it. His mother told me all the things that she thought I should mention to him, like the boy being so worried about his big brother who's in the army stationed in Iraq. He thought of him every day, and he prayed for his safe return. I got him out of my red sleigh and grabbed my green Santa bag and headed for the house. Jack's dad was there with the presents that I was to put into my green bag. One of them was for Jack and another for a smaller boy. Now, Jack's dad asked me to wait about 30 seconds after he went in, and then I could ring the doorbell. So here I am, waiting to get in, and the time is up, so I ring the doorbell, and I kicked the door a couple of times, like a noisy reindeer might be. The door was opened, and as I went through, I actually got stuck in it. My big Santa bag did not fit through it because of the huge box that was in it. I'm yanking, but I was afraid I was going to rip it, so I kind of did a little turn sideways, and I pushed the door a little wider, and then it got unstuck. But in the process, and as I turned, it was in a rather awkward position and off balance because of the weight of the bag. So as I moved forward, I lost my balance. I crashed headlong into the closed door, making one heck of a racket. And I'm sure that the inhabitants were wondering what was going on. Who was causing such a commotion? First banging on the front door, then coming in and causing such a ruckus. Well, I finally righted myself. I walked up the steps to where I could see Jack sitting in his wheelchair. Man, was he ever happy to see old Santa. Oh, wow. And I got to sit and talk with him as someone put a nice, comfortable chair right next to him. He was a really good-looking boy of 10 with an unusually positive outlook about his situation. And to think I made such a fuss about seeing this neat young man. He was very receptive and courteous. In fact, he was for the most part a typical 10-year-old. He seemed to be quite intelligent. And the first thing I said was, "Merry Christmas, Jack." And he wanted to know how I knew his name. Well, I told him Santa knows everybody's name. I also told him that I knew that he'd been thinking about his big brother every day, praying for his return. Jack asked me how I knew about his big brother. Well, I said Santa knows everything about him. So I turned his attention to my green bag with the huge present. I told him it was something that he had wanted for a very long time, but I couldn't bring it until now because I'd lost it. Yep, you heard me right. I did lose it. But I knew it would turn up again. But after looking everywhere and not finding it, I decided to ask my elves for some assistance. They were also looking everywhere, but there was nowhere to be found. So I went to look for Alfred Elf. If anybody, he could find it. Alfred was an elf who could find anything, but even now, he couldn't find it either. Well, then he suggested that I look in the green room. I didn't know what the green room was, but Alfred said that's the room where all the broken toys are kept waiting for repair. Oh, so I climbed up my ladder, and there the tallest shelves were there, and there in the back was this huge present. So I reached back. All of a sudden I heard a snap, and then a terrible pain in my fingers. I'd found a mouse trap. I was able to grab the present still, but somehow I got down with this mouse trap still pinching to my fingers. So I told Jack that I went through all that just to give him this present. I put it on my knee so he could unwrap it. He was having a time of it because it was so big. He was excited as he could be, and he asked me for some help. I assisted the unwrapping, and between the two of us, we finally got the gift unwrapped and removed. Well, that little boy was so happy to finally get the toy he'd wanted so long. Jack was so excited about his gift, he began to cry. What a joyous time for a little boy, Jack. He was actually and absolutely elated. I said, "Merry Christmas, Jack," and I gave him a big hug. He hugged me back, and he wouldn't let me go. He held on for a long time, and I started to cry too. It was time for me to return home, but the good feeling from that day stayed with me for a long time. The event and good feelings were actually extended because I knew that Jack's birthday was the day after Christmas on the 26th. I did call Jack all the way from the North Pole to wish him a happy birthday. He couldn't have been happier to hear once again from Santa, and my day was made brighter by the phone call as well. Well, Santa Ray tells a story about being Santa at the Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota. I went out to the local Renaissance Festival sometime in the early 90s around Shakopee, Minnesota with some friends. The woman who drove was named Deb. She placed a cassette of Christmas music into the radio slot for all of us to enjoy. And I said, either you're very late or very early for the Christmas music. Well, she said she listened to Christmas music all year long because she is associated with a business out of Colorado that hires people to play Santa Claus and elves around the holidays. She asked me if I ever played Santa Claus. Well, I said, yeah, I just did for fun, and I didn't expect to be paid, but she expressed an interest in hiring me to be Santa Claus that next Christmas. Well, I'd grown a beard, but it was only about 2 inches long, and I didn't know how long it would be by Christmas, but I accepted her offer, and she agreed to call in early November for an interview. And Deb did call in November, just as she promised. And my beard had grown for about 2 inches more, but I still didn't think it'd be long enough. But then I went out to dinner with a friend a few days before that I was to meet Deb, and we were seated in a booth about 3 booths away. There was a young father and 5 little boys. And one of the little guys, who was about 3 years old, got up on the seat. He turned around, he pointed, and he said something to his dad. And within a couple of minutes, the dad came over to where we were sitting, and he told us that when the little kid pointed at me, he was asking if I was Santa Claus. So that pretty much cinched it. I guess my beard was long enough. And later that week, I met Deb, and I signed a contract to work as Santa, and I was thrilled. A few days went by, and I thought back on our conversation. I remember that Deb had mentioned that I'd be working at the mall. Well, there's a lot of malls around here, so I called her, asked her, which mall? Well, she said, the Mall of America. My only thought was, the Mall of America? Are you out of your mind? The first time I'm hired to go and play Santa Claus in public as a professional, the place turns out to be the biggest mall in the country. I'm impressed and I'm shocked. Seeing many kids would be an understatement. The thought of such a task was overwhelming to me, and I said to myself, can I really do this? Well, I found myself in this mess, but I thought, I can't back out now. And I managed to convince myself that God doesn't give anything that we can't handle. Well, I decided, okay, I'll go for it. I would be expected to put the Santa Claus outfit on and boldly walk out to where I had never been before. And then I would just sit there like I knew exactly what I was doing. And there I was getting ready to do the little fat man in the red suit routine. And again, I still had no idea what I was going to do to make that happen. To prepare for my new role, I talked to a man by the name of Santa Wally, who had been doing Santa Claus for about 30 years. I asked him what his secret was, because after all, I'd have a lot of little kiddies depending on me. He told me to treat each little kid like someone real special, smart, cute, pretty, handsome, best dressed, and who was the most precious child in the world. That's what it's all about, he said. Well, that seemed easy enough to me, but that was before I had to go on. Well, then came the big day. I went to the dressing room. I found the Santa suit that I was supposed to wear. There were red pants and a big red coat, but before I could put on the coat, I had to put a thing called a belly booster, which is for those of us who don't have a naturally Santa belly. And after I put on the coat, I put on some boots, a belt, a hat, and white gloves. I was finally ready to make the long trek to the set. The set was in a big rotunda right by the entrance of an area called Camp Snoopy in the Mall of America. It consisted of a big white-green Santa chair in the entrance to a big dog house. And on top of the big house sat a Christmas tree 40 feet high, and all around the big house was a path. And on each side of the path were large gifts, and the gifts were 6 to 8 feet tall, wrapped in gorgeous Christmas colors with beautiful fancy ribbons and big colorful bows, and little automated critters pushed on the lids of those packages, tipping them. There was snow all around the packages and on both sides of the path. Well, all of the children were lined up on the path, and it was quite a sight to see. There were Christmas lights and music all around. And the children, they were so happy and excited to see Santa, they could hardly wait. There were little ones in strollers, and some were being held by their moms or dads and maybe grandparents. Some were walking. Some of the bigger kids were there to help with the little ones, and some of the little ones were crawling on the floor. Some of the kids were very happy, some were just waking up, and some were still sleeping. It captured the appearance of a Norman Rockwell painting perfectly. And then I, in my Santa suit, walked out, said hi to them, shook hands with some. I waved and sat down in the big, white, wide, green chair. How interesting it all was. Well, this was finally it. The time had arrived. I was old St. Nick, and I was going to do this job the very best I knew. I was going to feel real good about being Santa Claus. Most of all, I would love each one of those little kids, and I did. And I had a wonderful time and an experience that I will never forget. The experiences that happen to Santa Claus out there are mind-boggling. I have experienced wonderful times, funny times, and some really heartbreaking times too. One little girl around 2.5 sat on my lap and told me what she wanted for Christmas. And then her mother told me a little story that the little girl did not want her pacifier anymore. And her mother asked if she could throw it away, but the little girl said, "No, I want you to take it to Santa and he can give it to the baby Jesus." Ha! What a precious thing for a little kid to think of doing. Another little girl around 5 stood next to me and said that she didn't believe in Santa. She was very serious about it, and I told her that it's okay not to believe in Santa and that she could believe what she liked. And I talked to her about how good Santa is and how he loves little children and how he's going to come to her house even if she doesn't believe in him. I finally convinced her that Santa loves her. Well, before she left, she kissed me and said, "I love you, Santa." Well, I wasn't prepared for that. I guess it was her way of expressing her love for Santa. And then this sweet little girl left my chair, and when she got about 20 feet from me, she turned around, and in a fast run, she collided with and gave me a big hug. Now then, it was time for Santa to express his love, and he cried. Being at the mall during Christmas time, it's fun to see everyone in a holiday frame of mind. And with that powerful Christmas spirit that's in all of us, the whole center full of music flowing through it everywhere you go, all the colorful lights, the shops decorated in a fancy classy and festive style. And you look down from the main local area there, you can see Santa sitting surrounded by the little children while he entertains them in his make-believe North Pole palace. The little children are so happy to finally get to see Santa, and better yet, to actually sit down with him in a chair and talk to him. How much better can that get? Well, as I'm sitting there in the big Santa chair, I look out and I see what used to be a long line of children that's now trickled down to a very few. Probably because it's getting close to lunchtime. One of my elves has taken the time to put out my little sign that reads, "Santa has to feed the reindeer." Well, no matter what type of break it is, the same sign is displayed. And I wonder if some of those little kids ever wonder if the reindeer get fed that often, they might get too fat. They may not be able to pull the sleigh. Then what would happen? So I'm about ready to close up shop, but out of the corner of my eye, here comes this good-looking little blonde-haired boy. He looks about 6 years old, who comes up to see me. The little boy clumsily got up on the platform. The chair where he's perched on, he crawls in my direction. I wondered why he was acting so unsteady. I pondered the situation for a moment and could see that something was amiss. He was handicapped somehow. He kind of wiggled his way onto my lap. I asked for his name and he told me it was Ryan. I just sat there for a time and he started moving his hands all over my face and my arm. Then I knew what was going on with this nice, well-mannered little boy. He was blind. I asked if he was blind, and he said yes. Well, now as Ryan was there talking to me, I asked him all the usual questions. I asked the kids that come to me, and he answered the questions. And then he did a rather strange thing, or it seemed strange to me. He snuggled in real close to me, and he said, "Santa, do you have a heart?" Wow. What a question to ask Santa, especially this Santa. His question really took me by surprise and aback. I reflected several years earlier to when I was married to a lady who was stricken by polio as a child. I'd seen videos of her as a child trying to walk again and having a rough time of it. Well, that little guy sitting in my lap took me way back to a time when there was a little girl who was trying so hard to walk and she kept falling down because of the polio. Well, when the little boy without sight left the set, I had a hard time seeing him, and there's nothing wrong with my eyesight. It was difficult to see him through the eyes that were full of tears. It's very hard to express the feelings that I have when I'm out there in the costume. The touching things people do aren't all happy or sad. They are just anything that someone feels. One little girl was sitting on my lap, and she pushed my hat so it slid on my head, and the little rascal said, "Why, Santa, you're bald!" And her mother, standing only a feet away, she was totally speechless. Then there was the elderly ladies, 4 of them. They were walking by me about 20 feet from the set, so I waved at them to come over and see Santa. Well, they sure didn't want to do that, and they lingered back. So I got up from my chair, and I walked right over to them, and I asked if they'd like a Santa hug. Well, they got their hugs, which made their day, and I felt great. As Santa Claus, when I'm sitting in that big green chair, I have a responsibility to be the bearer of the Christmas spirit. And by being in that position, I go through many emotions. Santa is for everyone, young or old. Well, one day I noticed a young lady, about 35 years old, in a wheelchair, and she didn't seem happy. She looked kind of sad, and she was withdrawn. So I wanted to make her smile and feel a little better, and I don't know what it is like to have to be in a wheelchair. I really didn't know how she would feel, but I have been handicapped in my own way, and I sure know how it feels to be down and depressed and sad and not knowing which way to turn. But for the grace of God, I don't have many days like that anymore because of the AA program. But here I walked then down toward her, and I wondered what words I could say to make her feel better about her situation. And I knelt down beside her wheelchair as Santa Claus, and I said, "I hope I'm not embarrassing you by being here, but I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, and God bless you, my dear." I reached over to hold her hand briefly, and then I walked back to the set with tears in my eyes. So many people have so many problems, and somehow they become more prevalent at Christmas time. As Santa, people place so much trust in me and want more from me than one could expect. As my story continues, you will realize that Santa is many things to many people. An older lady in a wheelchair came to visit Santa. She was a happy young woman of 104 years. She wouldn't get out of her chair to sit on my lap for her picture to be taken, and she wouldn't allow me to sit on her lap when I jokingly asked if I could. So I just knelt beside her and we had our picture taken. And right after she left, a little 4-year-old girl crawled up on my lap, and I told her that the lady who had just left was 104 years old, and she had absolutely no idea what Santa was talking about. Well, I had 2 sets of triplets sit on my lap one time, and I also had 2 sets of young ladies and men sit on my chair and propose on Christmas Eve. And that was so much fun. Then there were 2 16-year-old girls who came to ask Santa something that was very hard to handle, and it was hard for Santa to control his emotions as well. One of them came over and sat on the arm of my chair, and she said, "I want you to do something for me, Santa." This was a hard one, because she went on to tell me that her mother was very sick with cancer. She asked me to pray for her to get well. All I could do after I hugged her and tried to soothe her was to say, "I'll do everything I can, and I sure hope your family has a blessed Christmas. God bless you all." About 3 days later, another teenage girl came to me and she said, "Santa, I'm going to ask you something that I'm sure you don't get asked very often, and it is so hard to talk about." And then she started to cry. She was trying to tell me that her grandmother had Alzheimer's, that she was failing so rapidly, and asked for me to pray for her. Not for God to save her, but just that she would not have to suffer. And that showed a lot of maturity to me. It took a lot of courage for someone so young to say what she said. It was a hard situation, and I cried with her. One day, a little girl came up to sit on my lap, and I could see her dad standing off to the side. He looked familiar. As he came close, I realized that he and I had met about 4 years ago. So I said, "Tom, what would you like for Christmas?" And he looked at me kind of strange, asked how I would know his name. Well, I replied, "I'm Santa. I know your name and where you live. I even know if you have a fireplace. I know just about everything about you." He was baffled. I was having so much fun that I decided to keep him in suspense a little longer. Then I said to him, "Listen to my voice. Does it sound familiar? Under this red suit and all this padding is a guy about your size. I knew you about 4 years ago. You don't know yet, huh? How about me having a long blonde beard? Come on, Thomas. How about the guy who painted your entry hall and that long wall up to your living room?" And then all of a sudden, he blurted out my name. I shussed him and I said, "Remember, this is Santa you're talking to." I think he was still in shock. Boy, what fun that was. Well, you know, I have a little problem with my lungs. I have asthma, and the allergy sometimes makes it so I have to use an inhaler to clear some labored breathing. I was doing the claws for about 900 little kids at an elementary school one time, and I had been there about 15 minutes when I had to use the inhaler to breathe better. Unfortunately, the inhaler causes my heart to beat very fast, and when that happens, I have a problem with the shakes. And that day at school, I had to hand out 900 little candy canes when I had a shaking problem. And kids, you know, they're so honest. One little boy asked why I was shaking so much, so Santa, with all of his knowledge and wisdom, answered, "Well, if you're 150 years old, you'd shake too." And so there have been many times that I've had a hard time from laughing hysterically, and there have been times when it's been just as hard to stop from crying. Now Santa Ray gives us a little bit of background as to how he started writing down the Santa stories. Santa Ray says, "My first job as Santa was, as you know, at the Mall of America, where you get to see and meet all kinds of people and children. So when I first started doing Santa, I was having such a fun time of it. I just had to try to keep track of the many people that came to see old Santa while he sat in his huge green chair out there in the rotunda by the old Sears store. I hadn't actually written anything down yet, but one night when I was hanging out with my friends, I was telling them about all the cute little children who came to see Santa, and that there was this little girl who no longer wanted her pacifier, but thought that she could give it to Santa, and Santa would give it to the baby Jesus, as you heard me me tell. I was in awe of this little 2-year-old girl who felt that much compassion in her young age. Well, there's a lot of surprises when one's out there seeing all those different people from everywhere and all over the world, in fact, who just stopped by to see that fat little man in the red and white suit. There was another little lady around the same age who was visiting with Santa that as soon as she got up on my lap started to sing Silent Night to me, and she sang it beautifully. Well, when she was all finished, she just slid off my lap and proceeded to nonchalantly trot off the set. And after she got about 6 feet from me, I said, "Aren't you going to tell me what you want for Christmas?" And she said, "No, I just wanted to sing to you, Santa." Now, isn't that something? And what a little sweetie she was. So many interesting people, not just the little children, some big kids too. I met different kinds of them wherever I went. Like the time I was out on my way to a party who wanted the presence of the jolly old elf at their home. My 1996 red Dodge van sleigh was low on gas, so I had to stop. I don't do this kind of thing often because I don't want to confuse the children, but I pulled up to the gas pump. I got out and proceeded to put gas into my Dodge sleigh. And as I was doing that, I saw out of the corner of my eye 2 little kids in the back of a van that was parked close to mine. But they didn't see me yet, and in the early part of my Santa career, I always had a pocket full of hard, round little peppermint candies. These were kind of my trademark, along with the fact that I randomly gave away teddy bears, which also was so much fun. Here I went in and paid for the gas, and when I came out, that other van with the little kids were still there. Then I went over to say hello, for their mom was in the front seat and their dad was opening the side door so they could see who was there. And their little eyes became huge. I explained that I just come from this huge candy warehouse where I picked up 3 truckloads of round peppermint candy because we ran out at the North Pole. And that's why I'm here. I just happened to have some with me in my pocket. And I reached in and I took out about 5 of each for each of them. Boy, were they happy. I was telling my friends these stories like that, and they asked me if I'd thought about saving them somehow. Well, I said I would just remember them. Then someone suggested jotting them down for safekeeping, and I got to thinking about that. And I realized I may be doing Santa for many years, and that they were really good stories already. How many more might there be? So I would like to have them in a safe place too, to look back on for reference, or who knows, what else might transpire. Even a book may be possible. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. I was writing in longhand, and I wrote 15 stories that night. And when I finished with all of them, all of the different escapades, it was unbelievably exhilarating as an experience to remember them again. Little did I know that writing would become sort of a therapy for me and allow me to let go of some of the anger also that I'd been carrying around for so long. And that's why I have this book. Santa Ray now tells the story of a Mankato family that came to the Mall of America. This story is about the time back in 1992 while I was working at the Mall of America. Winding down the end of another day, I was walking back to the dressing room. My shifts are 12 hours, and you might think that could be a grueling day, but it really wasn't. I don't think of it as really difficult. I do occasionally have to feed the reindeer a few times during the 12-hour period. Plus, a lot of time, there isn't really work since it's quite fun most of the time. How many people can you name who go to their place of employment and have fun and get paid handsomely for it? Can you name 5 people that you know like that? Well, I considered myself to be very fortunate. But unfortunately, this kind of wonderful employment is seasonal, and it lasts only 5 weeks during November and almost all of December. But for those 5 weeks, I've really had a blast because I get to meet some real neat people. Well, some of the people I meet are from other parts of the world who cannot speak our language. Worldly figures, well-known leaders in sports, even rich individuals dripping with furs and jewelry. And then there are the other ones, the kind that blend into the background that no one pays much attention to. Those are the real poor, the downtrodden ones, with gaunt faces, tattered clothes, who couldn't rub 2 nickels together. And some of them still come and see old Mr. Santa. But the ones I'm talking about now are the children who visit with Mr. Whiskers, those who will lay it on the line, the real down-to-earth characters. These are children who are honest to goodness children who haven't learned deception or manipulation. They know nothing of dishonesty and a whole lot of other those negative, unkind traits that some of us adults have seemed to acquire so readily. We sure didn't learn them in school. These are the little children who say it the way that it is. They're honest and forthright and straightforward and everything. It's too bad adults can't learn something like that instead of the other way around. As I was walking through the mall, heading to the exit, a lady appeared. I would venture to say that she had maybe 6 or more children. They all ranged from a babe in her arms to who knows how old. They were all dressed very nicely, and the young boys were handsomely dressed in slacks, vests, and ties. The little girls were dressed to the nines, too, with their pretty shoes and dresses, their skirts and sweaters and purses to match. I thought that maybe they'd just come from some sort of a church service. I said, well, you have a lot of children. How many are there? And the lady replied that they had 7 children ranging in age from 6 months to 12 years old. Well, that's a lot of mouths to feed, and they're so well behaved. They were pretty good kids most of the time. After all, they are kids. And she said they'll occasionally get themselves into mischief. And then she asked me if I was on my way to the set after a break. But I said no, I was going back to the dressing room to get ready to leave. Oh, she had a look on her face with the little kids, a real rejection about something. And then she went on to tell me that she was told that the mall would be closing at 10 o'clock, that they'd driven all the way from Mankato to have the kids' picture taken with Santa Claus. She said she dressed up everyone for the occasion and thought that their family would make it to the mall in plenty of time. The ball bearings in my head were rolling over, and it caused me to come to a conclusion. So that's why they're fancily dressed. You don't have to hit me in the back of the head with a shovel to get my attention. So I told the mother that if she'd driven all the way here with her children, she surely could get their picture with Santa. And then you will have your wish. Luckily, she had brought her own camera, and there was a bench nearby, and she rounded up her brood, and we all sat on that bench. I was holding the baby, and I asked the mother to sit on the bench too. A kind passerby offered to take a picture, and they got to have their nice family picture with Santa at the mall. The lady was so happy, and some of the children even got to sit with Santa ever so briefly to tell him what they wanted for Christmas. She couldn't thank me enough. I was just very happy that I could help. Santa Ray now tells a story about Santa at the daycare. The best party by far that I ever did was for my friend Al. Al's daughter had a daycare center, and he'd been playing Santa Claus there for a couple of years. And the children were starting to get wise. And so he asked me to fill in for him. Now, I knew that would be great fun. And he explained that he'd drive me over to the house on a special day, that there would be a sack of goodies right outside of the front door, and that he would go inside, and then I would walk in a short while later to go upstairs to shake the bells and sit down in a big chair that was provided for me. So the day went as planned, and all of the kids were there waiting for me, and I gave out the gifts, and the kids went wild. It was fun for them and for Santa too. But there was one little hitch. That just as I was ready to leave, a little blonde-haired kid, about 4 years old, asked where my reindeer were. So with all of my intelligence and wisdom, I told him they were out at the zoo with Rudolph and their friends were having lunch. He thought that was cool, and I thought I'd really baffled him and left it at that. Well, as I turned to say goodbye to all the little kids, who do you suppose yanked my trouser leg? So, he said, if your reindeer are out at the zoo, how did you get here? I thought to myself, now that's a really good question. I don't know how I came up with this answer, but I said to the little blonde-haired boy, I said, well, I was flown here by helicopter. That left him puzzled, but I guess I was puzzled too. And I hurried out. El's car was out waiting. I sank down in his car so no one would see me, and Al took me home. But that's not the end of the story. I hadn't been home for more than a half hour when Al called to tell me that he had just talked to his daughter, who informed him that about the 3 minutes after we left her house, a helicopter had flown over and hovered for a couple of seconds and then roared away. It seemed real low from the sound that it made, and the kids went crazy, especially that little blonde-haired boy. How do I make stories up like this? Santa Ray ends his book by telling us about some unusual requests that he received while playing Santa. Over the years, as my time as Santa, some requests received from children were quite out of the ordinary. One year, a little girl sat on my lap and asked for a horse for Christmas. I honestly can say I haven't had too many unusual requests in the years that I've been doing this round guy in the red suit, but this was one. I asked her if she'd had enough acreage. Well, she didn't know what that meant, so I told her it was a place big enough like a farm or a ranch where the horse can run and play. Well, she told me she did have a big backyard, and I laughed and I said, well, I don't think that would do. And then she said, well, could you get a ranch for my mommy and daddy? Well, I told her she was asking for a lot, but she said, well, Santa did that in the movie Miracle on 34th Street. I'm sure she thought that the Santa she was talking to should be able to do the same thing. Well, heck, if I could do that, I'd get one for myself. A house, I mean, not a horse. Another time, one of the little kiddos asked for a python. I said I didn't think I'd be able to get it down the chimney. Maybe that was something he could ask his mom and dad for. Yeah, these Santa stories are just a few. The many people I met, and these are the things that have occupied my life and occurred during my time as Santa Claus. These encounters sometimes could be very happy, and other times they could be very sad. But all in all, they all are very memorable. This is Don Knudson, who has been reading the stories from Santa Ray's book. He had called it Twisted Ears and Painful Years that started his life, but in the end, he found Santa Claus, a character he could play, a role that was graceful, loving, kind to children. May all of us in the Christmas season and beyond be loving and kind and caring to all of the children that we meet in our lives. Every one of us was a child sometime in our life, and we too have memories, don't we, of those early years. Some of them may have been twisted and painful years, difficult years, but in the Christmas season, we find the love that God has for all of us. And Santa Claus can be the one that gives us a glimpse of that childlike love that we all need. Merry Christmas to all of you who have been listening. This is Don Knudson. I hope you have a very good life in love and in grace that our God has given us.